Aloha everyone, welcome to the 33rd Annual Experts at the Cathedral series. Can I see who's here for the first time? Oh, a lot of people. Okay, great. Well, I'd like to welcome you. My name is Andrea Nandoskar. I'm the Education Program Manager at Historic Hawaii Foundation. And for those of you who may not know Historic Hawaii Foundation, we are a nonprofit organization. We're dedicated to helping people, communities, that is communities and individuals, save places that share the stories of Hawaii's history. And that goes from pre-contact all the way through mid-century modern and what will come afterwards. So thank you so much for being here. We'd like to send a big mahalo to Ralph Kam and Jesse Otto from the American Studies Department Graduate Certificate Program in Historic Preservation, and to the Cathedral of St. Andrew for hosting us. This year's series, I'll let Ralph share more on that, but it's the centennial of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, women's suffrage. And it's so significant to honor and recognize that, and part of doing that is holding a series where we recognize here in Hawaii the very special women, some of them well-known, some of them lesser known, that have impacted our communities and in many cases the nation and sometimes the world. So that's what we're all about here today, sharing some of those stories. And Historic Hawaii Foundation, you can read more about us on our website at historichawaii.org. We advocate, we educate, we provide technical services, and basically we do whatever we can to help people who care about the history and about protecting places that share the stories of those histories. We have a flyer in the back which shares some of the upcoming events, so I won't go into those in detail, but I would like to highlight one which is in connection with women's suffrage. We have met with and gathered groups of government and nonprofit organizations, educational organizations, to create a platform, which is a website now, which is in progress, and we'll be enhancing it throughout the year, to share advocacy opportunities, to learn about civic engagement, to get people to vote, and learn more about providing testimony for smart preservation and also laws to make the world better for everyone. And also the stories of women who have, like the women that are featured in this series, who have made Hawaii special and helped our communities. And also we'll be featuring events. So I encourage you to take a flyer, take a picture, whatever, of the flyer, and to engage back with us. And you can meet myself. I have Elizabeth Iwata, Beth Iwata is our development director, and Michelle Kisek in the back is our development associate. Any of us can answer questions for those of you who are new to Historic Hawaii Foundation. With that, I think I would like to just have Beth wants to explain a really fun, contest that we're doing for people who attend this series, because I know many of you come for more than one session. So she'll explain it quickly, and then we'll get started with the series.
Thank you. Yeah, just very quickly, we just thought it'd be add in some fun this year. We have a kind of like a passport, so every time you attend, make sure you get it stamped, and the person with the most, or the people with the most stamps at the end, will be entered into a drawing, which the prize is this Matson bag here, a chill bag with a reusable water bottle inside, a hat, and also a complimentary membership to Historic Hawaii. And if you're a current member, that means you get one free year, so to speak. And then this book, Hawaii's Early Territorial Days, Viewed from Vintage Postcards. It's a really interesting book with lots of images of old postcards. So anyway, please continue to attend, and we hope you enjoy today. Thank you.
It's interesting, in preparation for this series, Notable Women of Hawaii, I found a quote from one of the men who was supporting the suffrage movement. And he noted that, and think about this, he noted that Hawaii probably has more notable women than any other country in the world. And you think about it, the queens that were ruling here in Hawaii, people like Patsy Mink, who made major contributions on the national stage. I think that he was very accurate in that assessment. So today we are here because of preservation. There are only around a handful of copies of the speech that was delivered by Sybil Carter. They're over in the archive of the Hawaiian Mission Houses. So without that preservation effort, we would see the newspaper reports of what the speech was given, but we would not have known what the speech was about. And so preservation is very close to our hearts, and today you'll get a chance to hear one of the missionary descendants, not one of the Judd descendants, although I understand there are a number of Judd descendants here in our audience today. But we will be hearing exactly what Liliuokalani heard along with 100 other women in a space not far from here. So right across the street at the corner of the Capitol grounds, at the end of 1892, Central Union Church was located there. And this speech was delivered in Central Union Church and delivered to an audience that, once again, that had Liliuokalani in it. And this was in December of 1892, and we know what happened in January. So it's very close upon the delivery of this speech. So I'd like to introduce Elizabeth. Elizabeth Lenshill grew up in Kailua. She attended Punahou and later moved to the continent in high school. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Religious Studies with a minor in Women's Studies from Carleton College and an MFA in Dance from the University of Washington. She's been an artist, educator, and nonprofit administrator for over 20 years, and she established an extensive professional contemporary dance career and toured France, Mexico, Brazil, and the U.S. with numerous dance companies. Most recently, she was a tenured professor of dance at University of Southern Mississippi, serving as chair of both the dance and theater department in her final year. She returned to the islands in 2018, teaching at Asset School for 1 year before being appointed Director of Development for Hawaiian Mission Houses. And she is now part of the Mission Houses executive team that is going to be overseeing the 200th anniversary of the arrival of the first company of missionaries sent by the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions. Since joining the organization, she has loved relearning her own history, and these are all missionary names, as an Alexander, Bond, Bishop, and Baldwin missionary descendant, as well as sharing the stories of the vibrant programming and research that's being done at the Hawaiian Mission Houses. And one of those examples of the Mission Houses research is the book Partners in Change, which I believe some copies have been brought here. So without further ado, let's close your eyes, dream back to 1892, and hear what Sybil Carter would have said to Liliuokalani and the gathered audience.
Thank you for that introduction. Can you hear me through the microphone all right? No? Okay, well, let me try that. Let's see if I can pull this a little closer here. How about that? Better? Not at all. All right, here we go.
Yeah.
This okay? All right. I'm honored to be here today with you all in front of Judd descendants and a whole gathered ensemble, just as would have been over 128 years ago. Very exciting. I want to let you know that what I'm going to be reading is in two parts. The first is the speech that Mrs. Carter gave, and I'll let you know when we switch to the second part, which is the second part of the book that she then published after giving this speech. And in that second part, she has excerpts from her mother's journal, about Ka'ahumanu. So we'll hear the daughter's reflection and a research that she has done about Ka'ahumanu in the speech. Then we'll read the mother's direct words about her first experiences with Ka'ahumanu from there. Also, like any good historian, Mrs. Carter cites others and their research, so there'll be sometimes when you hear me say, as Mr. Stewart says, or on page 227, and these are things that she would have been referring to and the contemporary audiences would have known. As Ralph said, I invite you to close your eyes and take yourself back 128 years ago. Ka'ahumanu. Ka'ahumanu, the feather mantle, was born in the year 1773 at the foot of the hill Ka'uiki, Kawaipa'a, Hana, East Maui. It is said that she was born in the days of her parents' adversity. In infancy, she was once laid on the top of a double canoe, wrapped in a roll of white tapa, and as the party sailed along, she fell off while asleep, but was rescued. When a few years older, she had a second narrow escape from drowning. She was carefully reared by the High Chief Keeaumoku. A war took place when she was 8 years old, and she was taken to the city of refuge at Ho'onaunau. As Ka'ahumanu entered her teens, 2 rival chiefs were proposed as husbands for her. Kamehameha the Great being the victor, she fell to him. Mr. Bingham, one of the first missionaries, speaks of him as, quote, claiming the right of soil throughout the realm and the right to make and abrogate regulations at pleasure, and using the privilege of a conqueror who could not endure to have others enjoy their just rights. Kamehameha wielded a despotism as absolute as Hawaii ever knew. Availing himself of his high position, he monopolized the chief sources of gain. Mr. Jarvis describes Kamehameha as a savage of stern ferocity with piercing eyes, so that he seemed capable of penetrating the thoughts of those about him, a man any country might be proud to have acknowledged as her son. Captain George Vancouver, who visited these islands in 1794, influenced Kamehameha for good. The Hawaiian chieftain had heard of the changes made in Tahiti by the Christian religion and inquired the cause. He desired to be instructed in regard to the Supreme Being, but unfortunately those around him were not calculated to tell him the truths he longed to hear. At the age of 16, Ka'ahumanu is spoken of as beautiful and engaging. When Vancouver found that Kamehameha had separated from her, he invited her on board his ship, and by artifice, induced the king to come also. When they met, Vancouver placed Kamehameha's hand in that of the queen, and the king's stern heart softened. Reconciliation and tears followed. Before leaving the ship, Ka'ahumanu asked Captain Vancouver to make Kamehameha promise not to beat her. She often endured his anger and violence, but occasionally made manifest the independence of her character, and once decided to leave him, making the voyage to Kauai alone. On the 8th of May, 1819, the great conqueror Kamehameha I died. His last words were, "The kingdom is Liholiho's, and Ka'ahumanu is his regent, Kuhina." Liholiho, on taking the throne, began his reign by a measure without parallel in history. A heathen ruler, unbidden and uninstructed, cast off the idols of his people, and by one stroke of arbitrary power overthrew the whole system of tabu, interwoven with the mana of the priesthood. A war followed, and Ka'ahumanu and other women went to battle. In the year 1820 arrived the first missionaries, Mr. and Mrs. Asa Thurston, and Mr. and Mrs. Hiram Bingham, and others. Ka'ahumanu is said to have received them with great disdain, and reluctantly consented to their remaining for 1 year, during which time she watched them with a keen scrutiny. Ka'ahumanu was slow in giving them encouragement, and the questions she asked often showed her wisdom. She was the most powerful of all the chiefs and ever attracted particular attention. She wore a pa'u, of yellow satin, arranged in loose and graceful folds with the long end hanging negligently in front. Her upper robe, kihe, was of purple satin in as profuse a quantity. In the year 1821, writes Mrs. Lucy Goodale Thurston on page 64, quote, "It is a custom in Hawaii that women become leading parties in proposing marriage. Ka'ahumanu and Kamoali'i, while walking to the mission house, decided to unite. Kamoali'i was the tributary king of Kauai, and that night they slept side by side on a pair of very fine mats. Then a black tapa was spread over them, whose significance was that this pronounced the royal pair to be husband and wife. An important political union was thus peaceably effected, connecting the Windward and the Leeward Islands. Hopu was present and witnessed the ceremony." Mr. Jarvis says, on page 229, "Ka'ahumanu also took to be her husbands Kamoali'i and Keali'iahonui, the son of the first, thus holding father and son in her chains, which were not silken." Stewart states that this marriage was made in council, and that Kamoali'i, torn from his beautiful wife Kapuli Deborah, must marry the imperious dowager Ka'ahumanu. She is described as being very large, between 30 and 40 years old, still bearing the marks of beauty for which she was celebrated, her expression stern and unforgiving. She wears her hair neatly dressed with shell cones and ornamented with feathers, yellow, crimson, and bluish green. Kamoali'i, her second husband, is spoken of by Jarvis on page 155 as having keen features and attractive manners. Stewart writes, quote, "On the arrival of the new missionaries, probably 1827, Ka'ahumanu and her husband are their chief patrons and have commenced to study. They come to church in a stagecoach, which was once a tinker's wagon. No horses are used, but they are drawn by 15 natives. Kamoali'i appears more civilized, dignified, and more like a Christian than his fellow chiefs. I can, with strictest veracity, say of him that I never heard from him a word or witnessed one look unbecoming a prince. His life was peaceful and consistent. Kamoali'i died in 1824. Ka'ahumanu had him laid out on a Chinese settee, spread with a rich mantle of green velvet, the lower extremities wrapped in a quantity of yellow satin, while the head and chest were without covering except a feather wreath around his head so as to cover his eyes. The splendid war cloak of red, black, and yellow feathers was spread over the arm of the settee. In the year 1823, on the 8th day of May, Ka'ahumanu arranged a great feast in commemoration of the death of Kamehameha. According to Stewart, on the day of our arrival, there was a luau. The missionaries were invited, and some of the foreign residents and the officers of the ships in port. Black had been given out as the court color, and every article of that hue in the place, silk, crepe, velvet, and cloth, was bought. Those who could not secure any of these purchased silk handkerchiefs and made them into dresses. Kamamalu, the young queen of Liholiho, in satin and lace, was the mistress of ceremonies. While at table, a procession of 400 natives passed before the party. With ho'okupus, they were all dressed in white tapa and made a fine appearance as they passed, single file. 8 districts of Oahu were represented, and each head man carried a kukui torch. The ceremonies that followed were an interesting exhibition of ancient customs, which will soon be lost forever in the light of civilization and Christianity now beginning to dawn on this nation. Kamamalu sat on an elegantly modeled whaleboat, fastened firmly to a platform of light spars, borne on the heads and shoulders of 70 men. The boat was lined with broadcloth and beautifully figured tapa in rich colors. The men supporting the whole were formed into a solid body, so that the outer rows, at the sides and ends only of the company, were seen. These were splendid scarlet feather capes and helmets. Kamamalu wore a scarlet silk pa'u and a coronet of feathers. She was seated on the whaleboat and screened from the sun by an immense Chinese umbrella of crimson damask, richly ornamented with gilt tassels and fringe, and held over her by a chief in a scarlet malo and feather helmet. On one side stood the Prime Minister, Kalaimoku, brother of Ka'ahumanu, and in the other, Naihe, the national orator, both in scarlet malos and feather helmets, each bearing a kahili, or feather staff of state, nearly 30 feet high. The Dowager Queens, Kina'u and Kekau Onohi, presented themselves in much the same manner, but instead of whaleboats, had for their seats double canoes. Pauahi, another wife of Liholiho, after passing in the procession with her retinue, alighted from the couch on which she had been born and set fire to it. All its expensive trappings she threw into the flames, as well as her own dress. She was immediately imitated by all of her attendants, and a large quantity of old tapa was thus burned. All this was to commemorate her narrow escape from fire while an infant. Ka'ahumanu's dress was made of 72 yards of double kershmere, one half being scarlet and the other orange. This was wrapped around her figure until her arms were supported by the bulk. The remainder was a train borne by her attendants. The young prince and princess, Kauikeaole and Nahi'ana'ana, in scarlet malo and kihei, rode upon a Chinese four-posted bedstead covered in tapa and ornamented with yellow cloth. Two chiefs of rank bore their kahilis, and following them, as if servants, came their stepfather and guardian, one carrying a calabash of poi, and the other a dish of raw fish. Mr. Stewart expatiates upon the splendor of this pageant. Quote, "The King Liholiho and his suite made a sorry exhibition, nearly naked, on horses without saddles and all intoxicated. A guard of 60 men tried to keep order. Companies of hula girls and men met at the procession at different places, encircling the chiefs and shouting their praises. The dull and monotonous sounds of hula drums and the wild notes of their songs fell in the air." Ka'ahumanu, when about 50 years old in 1824, had a deliberate speech and queen-like hauteur. "Just look into the thatched house of this queen and see the missionary's wife, Mrs. Bingham, stand patiently for 1 hour, waiting for Ka'ahumanu to turn from her card playing to have her first dress tried on, only to hear, 'Pilikia, hemo hanaho.' Another year passes, and you may see the same queen at her own writing desk, with maidens all around her, learning to use the scissors and needle. In her room, a work table, a bedstead, a glass window, and a primer. During this year, 1824 to 1825, Ka'ahumanu had a severe illness. Mr. Bingham visited her daily and was very kind to her. His gentle influence affected her, and in 1825 she made a public profession of her faith. Instead of the cold and contemptuous queen, she became warm and affectionate and kindly in manner. So great was this change that she is now called the new Ka'ahumanu. She turned the tide of heathenism and skepticism in favor of Christianity with firmness and energy. In 1824, Liholiho decided to go to England, where both he and his queen Kamamalu died of the measles. In May 1825, their remains were brought back to Honolulu in charge of the Right Honorable Lord George Anson Byron, commander of the Royal Naval Ship, the Blonde. In an English newspaper of that date was printed the following, quote, "On the 8th of June, the Queen Kamamalu died. Liholiho the king manifests a firmness of mind in his sorrow and penetrates all those about him with a feeling of respect." Mr. Bingham describes the scene of the return of their bodies on page 278 as one of deep interest. A few days after the arrival of the Blonde, Lord Byron presented the salutation of the King of England, George IV, and his sympathy at the sad fate of the Hawaiian king and queen. Among other gifts, he presented a heavy silver teapot to Ka'ahumanu with the British royal arms engraved. Lord Byron gave Ka'ahumanu and her brother some valuable hints in regard to governing the people, as they were to act together as regents during the minority of Kauikeaoli. The Blonde sailed for the island of Hawaii with Ka'ahumanu and suite on board, and in honor of Lord Byron, she gave the bay at Hilo his name, Byron's Bay. Ka'ahumanu in person proclaimed the first code of laws. First, against murder, referring especially to infanticide. Second, there shall be no drunkenness, no boxing, no fighting. Third, there shall be no theft. Fourth, all the people must regard the Sabbath. Fifth, when schools are established, all the people must learn. Ka'ahumanu, in her tour of the group in 1830 and 1831, promulgated the famous edict respecting marriage. It was in substance that, quote, as to those persons who were united according to former customs of this country and are still living together, with nothing to render their union illegal, their union is hereby confirmed anew in the same manner as those who are married. But from the present time, all persons are prohibited from uniting together according to former customs. It is proper to marry. After this edict was published, a man and a woman thus consorting were considered to be legally married, and their issue held by the courts to be legitimate. During this year, at a sermon preached by Mr. Charles Samuel Stewart on the text, "Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light into my path," Ka'ahumanu wept. And when asked why, she said, "Oh, it is so true that God's word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. In my former days, we were in thick darkness. We wandered here, we wandered there, and we were all hastening to the dreadful precipice over which our fathers had fallen. But now God's word has come, and I now see the darkness and the light." She sent out teachers, made tours addressing the people in person, ordering them to attend to the palapala, books and reading. Pua'aiki and Ta'u were touched by her words and exclaimed, "Ikaikaloa o Ka'ahumanu, Ikaikaloa, Ikaikano Ka'ahumanu." Very strong, very firm, very decided indeed is Ka'ahumanu. Mr. Stewart, on his second visit to the islands, describes a meeting of the chiefs in Ka'ahumanu's new house. Quote, "The room was well lighted, with several handsome glass lamps, mahogany tables, carved bedsteads, etc. in the room. Ka'ahumanu and Kalaimoku are on one side, the queens of Liho Liho and the sisters of Ka'ahumanu on the other, and the evening was given up to religious conversations. When I recollected that these once were noisy, drunken idolaters, now sober, earnest, gentle, I blessed God for all my eyes now see. By advice of her physician, she was retired to Manoa Valley. Her residence is beautifully situated, commanding a fine view. Delicious streams of clear water pass through the grounds. Behind her house is a delightful grove of ohia, dark and shady and full of birds. On the edge of this wood stands a little cottage, built by Ka'ahumanu for the accommodation of the missionaries who visited her. She continues to exert all her influence for good, and her authority is unbounded, her example powerful. Liho Liho was a great trial to Ka'ahumanu. He inclined to everything bad, but her decision and strength of mind enabled her to control her people, and she extricated them from many perplexities. On the 4th of June, 1822, Ka'ahumanu had Kalaipahoa, Kamehameha's idol, and 9 other idols publicly burned. In the same month, she gathered from their hiding places 102 idols and had them burned. Ka'ahumanu established the laws of Christian marriage. When she understood the value and beauty of this law, she separated from Keali'iahonui. He is spoken of as the handsomest man in the nation, a noble figure, very fine features, marred by the loss of his front teeth, knocked out in testimony of his grief on the death of Kamehameha. Keali'iahonui was enticingly told about jewels and precious stones by a trader. The description of diamonds pleased him especially, so he ordered one. "How large will you have it?" said the trader. "Oh," said Keali'iahonui, "not larger than a coconut." In a letter from Mr. Bingham to Dr. G.P. Judd, I found the following, dated February 21st, 1831. Quote, "I hear that some of the foreign residents have begun to toast me with a sort of polite wish that Ka'ahumanu and I were dead, that peace might be restored to the islands. Union among the chiefs, union among the missionaries will soon silence the roar of the lion." In the year 1827, the Roman Catholic priests arrived. I refer those of you who are interested to the transactions that followed to Jars's history, chapter 10. The strong connection which the idolatry of their old system seemed to Ka'ahumanu to have with the rites of the Roman Church must explain her intolerance. During this excitement, her life was endangered and a revolution meditated. Ka'ahumanu said, "We have put away our idols and broken the taboo. We have received the word of God, and as our kingdom is a little one, we do not wish our subjects distracted by any other sect." The Catholic converts wore crosses. When Ka'ahumanu knew this, she forbade it, but the converts did not obey. Accustomed to implicit obedience from the people, she saw that this form of religion would create a disturbance in her realm. Dibble says, quote, "During the reign of Ka'ahumanu, the leading features of the government were of a feudal character, but oppressiveness was mitigated by the humane character of Ka'ahumanu. And for the next few years, there was a great tide of progress, from absolute savagery to the justice of Christianity." She did not understand that her authority extended merely to civil matters. In council, it was decided to banish the Catholic priests. When all was ready on November 5th, 1831, Ka'ahumanu herself took them by the hand and told them they had disregarded her laws and must leave. Time will not admit a description of an interesting visit of Captain William Compton Bolton Finch in 1829. Mr. Stewart says, quote, "I never before saw Ka'ahumanu more excited. She seemed scarcely able to control her feelings." He also describes her home. "It has the air of an old lady's mansion. Easy chairs and sofas are conspicuous. The children of UH-Manoa hang about her like spoiled pets on a fond grandmamma at home. The queen herself is in good high humor, with her portly figure and commanding